This is the moment of truth. By now, I'm sure that a lot of you have heard about the Supreme Court's recent ruling regarding Texas deportation law. We're going to get to that in a minute, but there's also some other news in the world of illegal immigration I want to talk about. I'm sure. Now, it's not until you actually read the article that you see that, as usual, they bury in the story that actually there's been fewer than 10 migrants who have been evicted from Chicago's shelters. So that's kind of a far cry from the idea that apparently they're kicking all of these people out. They're not doing that at all. This is basically a gesture. You got the mayor of the city, this Brandon Johnson.
Yep, I'm definitely real.
I'm firmly convinced must be related to Jason Johnson somehow. And this guy, I guess, is doing this because, well, he's got to do something. But the question happens to be, is this going to be all that's actually done? Or is this perhaps the beginning of what could be a larger trend? Hard to say. One thing that's not doubtful is that apparently the immigrants, the handful of them who were told that they had to leave the shelters, they didn't like what was happening. One of them, who's from Venezuela, actually said that he felt that being forced out was disrespectful. Apparently, he felt that it didn't show him any respect. Quote, "It was clear that I needed to leave and I respected that, but the treatment, it was a lack of respect." He was quite indignant, apparently. And not to be messy, but while this guy said that he felt disrespected by being forced to leave the place he had called home, a shelter he'd been living in, I have to wonder, when he left Venezuela, did that also make him feel disrespected? I would think that it should have. Because Venezuela is actually the place where the man was born, the place where he grew up. He had spent all of his life there, but he didn't fight for home. The city ran away from it. And that's an issue in and of itself. Situations don't get better because people run from them. They only get better when you stop, turn, and actually confront the problem. Now, one of the things that disgusted me but didn't surprise me is that in Chicago, you've had the authorities going on this jihad of closing down as many schools as possible, but most of them in black areas. They've been doing everything they can to close down black schools in black areas. They were all victims of budget cuts. At least that's what the authorities were saying, shutting down all of these schools left, right, and center. They just didn't have the money to keep them open. No staff and personnel, can't do nothing about it. Well, it turns out that one elementary school, Wadsworth Elementary School in particular, has been used as a shelter for these migrants, for a lot of them anyway. And that being the case, apparently the city was able to come up with money for schools. They just couldn't do it to actually educate people, especially not black students. But if you have people who are not even citizens of the country, well, they'll go ahead and find the money for that. They'll pony that up immediately. That's the reason why, whenever it comes time to talk about certain issues, like the redlining lawsuits that the Justice Department brought against a number of banks, or when it came to the Supreme Court ruling regarding the minority, it was important to point out how the money gets spent in these cases. Because in the case of the so-called Minority Business Development Agency, an agency that was created allegedly to actually address the rampant, deliberate, targeted deprivation of funds that black people face whenever it comes time to try to get loans for a business or money to help grow a business, we get completely singled out to be deprived of those funds. So it was the federal government, at least allegedly, trying to do something about it on its own. And yet black people are the main ones who don't get any money from that either. They make it a point to prioritize non-black people, especially if they happen to be immigrants. They'll go ahead and make sure that's what it becomes. As I stated in the video, it's been documented that at least in 2022, 8 times as much money went from the Minority Business Development Agency to Hispanic applicants as opposed to black applicants. So if you have two groups whose numbers are, at least on paper, equal, how do you get a disparity like that? It's because you have an entire agency. This is not a mistake on their part. This is the agency working exactly the way that it was intended. And the same thing happens to go for the Justice Department's lawsuits against those redlining banks. It was black people who they were actually discriminating against. But the Justice Department made it a point to tell these banks, we have to also...
the others.